but let's leave room for you to talk a little bit about, bit more about the recovery stories, not just Wired In, but you've re-released a book of recovery stories, which I'm in the process of reading at the moment, and we'd like to plug it because it's really cheap. You can get it cheaply online, and so but it's full of, you know, real people's stories and their recovery journeys. And I think it's got something in there about your own journey as well, which I was reading.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that. But quickly, let me just say one thing about the Felitti adverse child experiences work. One of the most stunning things that I've heard is on one of his little films, when he emphasizes that newspapers and people go nuts when there's someone shows a 30% greater chance of cancer with something, you know, certain food. They found that people with 6 or more adverse child experiences, the increased likelihood of becoming an intravenous drug user is 5,000%.
Yeah, I remember.
And the same with suicide, attempting suicide. So let's get things into perspective. And one other thing about the stories before I describe the recovery stories. I remember that in the latter time of Wired Into Recovery, in early days of recovery stories, an Australian girl, Maddie, who had an alcohol problem, wrote and said that she used to print out the stories and carry them in her back pocket. And she would say to herself, if a person with a heroin addiction can get over it, she should be able to. And those stories followed her everywhere.
So she physically
deeply moving blog, and I must dig it out. But no, so along my journey, I've obviously met a lot of people. We've done a lot of stories. I know at Burton Addiction Centre, for example, my daughter wrote 19 stories from interviews. A Neen project, we did a whole booklet of stories and an audio thing. But these are people that I met on my journey, and then around 2013, after Wired Into Recovery closed down, and we'll come back to that another time, I thought that I wanted to build a new website called Recovery Stories, had the same philosophy about empowering people through hope, understanding, and gaining a sense of belonging. I thought I would also put them into a book with some articles as well, but as it turned out, I focused on just the website. And these stories are, as I say, all people I've met on my journey. Some of them wrote them themselves. Some of them are treatment practitioners. Others have gone off, but they're not people who have overcome addiction without treatment and disappeared. These are people I've met in this world. Mostly UK people, and the stories are in depth. So after 2013, either they wrote them or I interviewed them and put them together. 7 years on, when I've been working with Aboriginal people for a number of years, I'm really missing the recovery stories and the addiction recovery field. And I'm also, though we'd had very little COVID here in Western Australia, we've been very lucky thanks to our state government. I'm watching what's going on. I'm in the UK, obviously, because of my children and grandchildren are there. And I'm thinking, and having been disillusioned with society, Western culture society for a while and governments, I thought the world has to change. And it isn't going to come from politicians. It's going to come from grassroots, and it's going to take a lot. And all those people who know something which can help this need to get that down so it can be passed on to younger people. And I remember only recently seeing that the great educationalist Ken Robinson did the same thing, and I didn't realize when I watched his last film that he passed away soon afterwards. One of the most inspirational men. And I decided that I had to get down all that I'd learned during these years, and I needed to get those voices going again. So I contacted the people who were on the Recovery Stories website, and all but one said yes. They either wrote their own story or their own update, or some didn't want to update. One since, who's very well known in the field, has said to me, I wish I'd done it now, but I was very busy at the time.
Yeah.
Others updated very long, or I worked on them on numerous calls on Skype and things. And 3 of those stories turn out to be huge trauma stories, which wasn't really anywhere near as apparent at the first. People are doing well.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, if I'm doing this, then I've obviously got to write a chapter on the basis and using quotes, the factors that facilitate recovery, as shown by these stories. And I should write my journey. You know, I'm actually writing a much more detailed book about that journey, the people I've met, their lives, etc. And I just published a book as an ebook on my Aboriginal work. And I thought, well, I can get it out quickly this way. I know everyone can't access it, but also it's tougher to get a publisher when it's a one-off. If I've got a series of books, much more interested, much more likely to publish. Let's get this out there. So it went out a couple of weeks ago. I think £4.99, is it?
Yeah. It's not expensive.
I think it's 170,000 words, so it's twice the size of a normal book. Quite a chunky read. I mean, at least one of the storytellers, I'll call them, had such an amazing story and was so good at telling that story. I just kept writing. I wasn't going to say, Brad, that's enough.
What we'll do is when we get this podcast out there, we'll make sure that links to recovery stories and links to the book go on there somehow.